like I need to get a dance routine for that one. Where my kids have been so I don't have TikTok on my phone, right? It's like a little bit scary in cyber world, but the kids carry TikTok around, and there's like this whole set of TikTok slang that just like pours out of me when I see the music on the screen. I'm like, is that
I
appropriate
want you to
for
give me some TikTok slang now.
we'll have to do that offline, I think.
Perfect. I really look forward to it.
It's
Super
all over the
excited.
house though. I can't get away from it.
I'm a
Well, I
big.
want to see the dance. The dancing sound, I'll pay money for that.
Do you guys both have a Gen Z exposure to like the
Oh
kids
man,
that are like pretty young, like
I'll
teenage?
let Karla answer. Well, I'll let Karla answer
That
first, or
question
only.
is very wrong. We have babysitters that probably fall in that demographic. But I feel like maybe it's just the ones I know. They don't fall into the demographic in the way that I would expect them to stereotypically.
Or definitely not when you're around.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it.
That's funny.
I mean, they wear lounge pants and Crocs, and that's the.
Yeah. No one wears pants anymore. Like I'm wondering when this is gonna make it into the office. Like I still wear slacks to work, right? And my kids are like, Dad, no one wears pants anymore. I'm like, what? Where do you put your stuff? Like, don't you need a pocket? And they're like, no.
Well, now you know what it feels like to be female. Where are my pockets? I just gotta have claws for hands so I can
You
carry.
guys get those nifty purses though. We can't get away. Well,
Look,
I guess we can a little bit now.
I thought the ultimate in gender equality was they were going to start putting real pockets in women's clothes, but it seems like it's going the other direction.
They did it.
No,
They did it
take
different.
them
Yeah.
from men. Won't pay women the same. Just pay you guys less. That sounds fair.
All right, intros. We have Karla with us from Orpheus. Karla, give us the like elevator here. Who are you? Where do you come from?
Well, the accent tells you that I'm from London, but I'm in Northern Virginia. So I've got a background in cyber, probably, I keep saying 10 years, but I'm being reminded it's maybe closer to 15, which I dislike the people that are reminding me that. And then Orpheus, we do vulnerability prioritization and third-party risk management. So that's me and us.
And I'm founder CEO of Fort Mesa. We also work in vulnerability management. We're on the workflow side of how to help an MSP maintain an SLA and make some revenue off of their vulnerability findings. But our center of gravity is GRC and compliance. We help service providers really inform their customers, convert them into informed security buyers that will invest in their security bundles and their security projects, and then of course prove that their solution is compliant with standards and regulations. Zach,
Howdy.
Welcome back to Friday.
Thank you. Happy Friday. Big Friday fan. My name is Zach Keeney. I am co-founder and channel sales director with Fort Mesa. And prior to my time with Fort Mesa, I owned my own small business where I contracted and worked directly with MSPs. So I provide kind of the other side of the table to Matt's high-level technical skills and help to put things in digestible form for the endpoint clients.
Okay. Before we jump into today's topic, we're going to do our awareness gig. So here's our control of the day. So this one's topical for today because we're a vulnerability management vendor. Karla's got a few different angles on vulnerability management. So this was a good fit. I think MSPs have been doing vulnerability scanning either for their customers or with their customers for decades before MSPs were called MSPs. But it's not until the standards and insurers, organizations have really been pushing towards defining, well, what should be in a vulnerability management service? What is good vulnerability management? And it turns out it's not scanning. Scanning's not enough. You do need to scan. You need to find all of the vulnerabilities. You need to find them rapidly. You need to discover them wherever they are. But then And this is the important part, and the part that's sort of new to our industry is you have to do something about it. So depending on which standard, the best practice is you have to find the vulnerability, decide what you're going to do about it, and then either fix the problem or do a risk accept within a defined SLA. It's usually between 14 days and 30 days is defensible under most security standards. But you don't have to fix everything. You only have to fix whatever's in alignment with your risk decision making. So what this CIS 7.1 control is really speaking to is that you document that process. You decide how you're going to do this. This is define it. You're gonna take a scan. It's going to be weekly. It's going to be daily. Someone's going to be in charge of rating them, reading them, etc. And then you're going to do something about it. Now, 7.1 is just about documentation, but this control group CIS 7 does go into a few other detailed controls around how to risk rate, how to make decisions on what should be fixed and stuff. And certainly if you want to learn more about this, dig into CIS controls, go to the control group 7 and check out that group. Karla, I think this is the year of vulnerability management, right? I've been seeing it in our market segment for sure. Tell me what's your experience with how our MSP friends are doing right now in this control group?
I really loved what you just said about how, you might be scanning, but then what are you doing about it? Because I'll say to people, hey, what do you use as your scanning tool? And mostly I get some sort of answer. And I say, well, then how do you prioritize? And I get a lot of blank looks because I think it's, well, what do I do next? And the reason why, like, the results are overwhelming in terms of what you actually get back from those scans. So I think it makes a lot of sense that, you're a little bit frozen when you get thousands and thousands of results. But like what comes next? That's the year I think everyone is kind of waking up to what we do.
So normally we'd spend a few more minutes, talking about this control group. However, today's like vulnerability management deep dive day. So I threw that off the screen here. Let's just talk about the problem statement in a little more detail before we get into the technical specifics. Do we have a problem statement in your what you were going to present, or should we talk about that for a few minutes? Because I know.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I there's the pain point, right? Not just from the MSP perspective, which is sort of like, okay, how do I make a process about this? How do I do this on an ongoing basis? How do I get the customer to pay for it? How do I make money while I'm getting the customer to pay for it? Like those are all the MSP pain points, right? But if we go to the end customer pain point, right? Attackers are breaking into networks, right? They get access to one asset, and then they either escalate their privileges or they move across a network between assets to another asset. When they escalate privilege, that's just called privilege escalation. When they move around between assets, that's called lateral movement. And they do this combination of things, lateral movement, escalation, lateral movement, until they get to whatever their goal is. And the goal may be download the customer database. It may be take down an oil pipeline. It may be like crypto lock everything in the company or steal all the data. Like there's a lot of different end goals, right? But that action that an attacker's taking to further their breach, right? It depends on these chains of vulnerabilities. And even if they get into a system using a credential misuse, they are then leaning on vulnerabilities throughout a customer's environment to move around and do the things they're trying to do. So the problem statement, cyber insurers have woken up to this fact. They're getting smarter, right? So they are now saying on their insurance forms, they're not just saying, are you doing vulnerability scanning? Which it used to be like if you did a scan once a year, that was like enough and you could check the box. And now it's, are you doing vulnerability scanning on a continuous basis? And are you using a risk rating system to determine how to manage your vulnerabilities? And sometimes they even have refinements from there. And those are basically in alignment with what the standards are saying. So Zach, you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I wanted to ask a question related to what defines continuous. You mentioned on our slide on our only slide on the control slide there that some people are scanning daily, some people are scanning monthly. And what is the difference? How can I tell the difference? And what are the auditors actually looking for?
So, I mean, the auditors want to know. It depends on what auditors you're talking about. The insurance auditors just want to know you're like lower risk than the other guy, right? Um, other types of auditors are going to be looking at a security standard, right? It's whatever it says in the controls. And you're going to get a different guidance whether you're in Australia or North America, subtly different, but basically saying the same practices. You're also going to get different guidance whether you're at, like, for example, if you're at NIST 853, if you're at like a low baseline versus a high baseline, right? Same thing in CIS. When you're on IG1, you're getting slightly different guidance than when you're on IG3. So, but when it comes to what's continuous, I mean, what they're really concerned with is the outcome. Are you finding the vulnerabilities fast enough to stop the attackers who are using like new vulnerabilities? And are you doing something about it fast enough to stop the attack? And if you're only scanning once a year, you're not. Um, you could probably do what you need to do here with a weekly scan if you're like extra fast with the rest of your processes. But for most people, continuous means daily. It's the only way to get the whole process done in that 14-day timeline is to find new things every day and not scan for vulnerabilities, spend 3 months fixing them and then scan again, right? You're scanning for new ones every day and you're continuously remediating whatever's the highest risk. Color, where else are you seeing in terms of like a pain point, a pressure point, or like why do people care about vulnerability management now? Like what's actually kicking them in the neck? Like why are they buying?
It's become the number one way attackers gain entry. So phishing kind of peaked over vulnerabilities a little bit, but now what we're seeing is attackers are scanning companies. It's really, easy to sit and cheap to sit there and scan companies and look for the ones that you can break into. So that's, I think, why it's coming to the forefront. I think there's an understanding of the way we're remediating is not working. So I think that's another key reason why it's coming up. But if you think about, like, there's a lot of things the attackers can do, like you said, with lateral movement, privilege escalation. Like, what are their goals? Different types of threat actors have different goals, different objectives, but like there's a limited number of ways they get in. Like, and vulnerabilities is one of the key ways they're going to get in, no matter what software you're using or what protections you have. Like, it's kind of the main thing that they're going to do. There's other ways, insider threat, phishing emails, but this is something that actually you could really make a big difference on with a good patching cadence.
I'd like to ask you a question. You said that the way that we're remediating isn't working. I run into a lot of MSPs that are relatively new in the space and are considering adding a vulnerability management tool. And I get the question a lot, is this going to do the remediation? Talk a little bit about what remediation is, what that process is, and what different tools can do for you in that space.
Yeah, there are tools that will patch automatically. Some things don't have a patch, right? So you then need to put mitigations in place when you can't patch. And actually, I've forgotten exactly the number. There's some numbers that I've got from what are we looking at? So 2022, like 17,600 vulnerabilities were discovered. You're not going to have all of those, but like, you can't patch 17,000 things. Like, your systems would be offline continuously. You've got to decide what you patch, what's actually going to make a difference by you remediating it. And yeah, like, do you have a solution that is going to help you patch, help with that cadence, like help you do those things? That's really valuable too.
And so you're mentioning patch management, and clearly like that's like the biggest weapon, right, that we need in our arsenal is just patch the thing. The vendors find these things, they fix them, but if you don't put the fixes in place, you're still vulnerable. But there's lots of stuff that's not patchable out there. The software vendor went out of business. The software vendor just doesn't care. The software vendor's in on it. Those things all happen. And then you end up with the complexity of patch management itself. Like, is your patch management product capable of patching this thing? Is the system even updatable? maybe the patch is going to break something. So patching's not the, patching's the first thing you go to, right? But you need the vulnerability management system, not just a patch management system, because patching's not always the solution. Sometimes you need to just pull that thing from the network or replace a product. And and other times you get the customer to accept it. But in that case, it's very, very important that the people that are actually going to be harmed by that vulnerability are accepting that, and not just accepting it in a theoretical perspective of, yeah, we know we don't have perfect security, but you tell them, hey, this specific thing in your business has this potential risk, and it's likely that this could happen, and you need to have that conversation, and someone needs to document the outcome of that conversation, right? We're going to replace the thing, we're going to fix the thing, we're going to patch the thing, whatever the conclusion is, right? And the technologists can't do this on their own, right? You need to work with your end customer on that.
What? And just sorry, Karla, and I'll just pose this question to you or to both of you. Why does the end user, end client, need to be the one making that decision? How come my MSP can't just decide what I accept in terms of risk and why not? And Karla, I'll let you take the first crack at it, and I know Matt has plenty of thoughts on this.
Well, I guess that depends on your relationship with them. But if you're asking them to accept a significant risk, they need to be aware of that. And if they need to replace or upgrade a system, that's going to be a cost. Like, that's not a decision that you can necessarily make on their behalf. But yeah, I think if it's saying we can't or don't want to mitigate this, they really need to own that risk. Otherwise, you own that risk.
And yeah, Matt likes to talk about them owning that risk. So what does it mean for them to own that risk, Matt?
Do you guys know that there's the one other term for insurance is called risk transfer, right? Insurance is actually a type of risk transfer. But there's another type of risk transfer, which is risk transfer onto the MSP. And if you're not careful with your contract verbiage and you haven't had the right conversation with your customer, you could literally be left holding the risk. And you might think, hey, the customer said they didn't want this thing, right? They didn't want to spend money on a thing. That's their choice. But if you haven't gone through the risk management process with them and there's a breach, you can be found liable. And the MSP could be left with the biggest loss. And so I think, customers may not want to talk about vulnerabilities, but business owners do want to talk about risk. In fact, risk is most of what they do, right? If being a business owner was easy, everyone would do it. We would have no businesses because everyone would just like be an independent agent, right? We'd all be in charge of ourselves. But it takes people whose dedicated job is to balance benefits and cost and plan strategically how a business can move forward into their market and through time and with their customer relationships. And risk is part of that, right? Risk, you're going to lose an employee, right? They might hit the lottery. Risk that...
or the slots at ChannelCon, watch out.
Yeah. Good. Not with a Fort Mesa shirt on, they won't.
Keep going.
There's all kinds of business risks, right? And if you take the vulnerability risk conversation and you turn it into a business risk conversation, not only will your customer be happy to have the conversation, they'll be informed and they'll make the right investment decisions. And so you're going to get, yes, I would love to invest in that in security improvement rather than it sounds too expensive or I don't want to have the conversation. It will impact the type of investment that a service provider is making when they're talking about these things, when they understand these things. Sorry, the end customer. So that's, the risk ownership conversation, who's holding the risk, is something that needs to happen. But, it is a shared responsibility. There's actually a chain of risk. It's the service provider, maybe some software vendor. You've got all the people in a business up the hierarchy that are all in a risk chain, and then the customer, the end customer's customers are also in the risk chain, right? And we got a comment here, which I'm just going to bring up on the screen here. Jane, this must have been before I started jabbering. James did a much better job of bringing that down into a sentence or two. But yeah, assigning the risk and assigning the responsibility, it's important. So, whew, that was like I feel like I just ran a marathon through vulnerability space. We're gonna get technical though, right?
We're gonna go a little deeper, yeah.
Yeah. So should we make that transition?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody get a sip of your lemonade.
Karla, this is all you.
All right. Well, I have no idea how to move my slides across. So
You just have to like signal me. You want me to go forward?
Let's go forward, yeah. So this is kind of what I was just talking about. Like you can, these graphs here are from, so everything that Orpheus does is threat intelligence led. We have this team of threat intelligence analysts pulling all this stuff. So you can, if you're looking at the incidents on the right, like what you can see is that scanning an enumeration attack. So that's where threat actors are literally sitting there scanning for companies that have vulnerabilities that they have the capability to exploit. You can see like how that really peaked, and it has come down, but it's exceeding the number that we're seeing in phishing. And actually like an updated version of that would see that going higher. You can see where phishing really, really peaked a couple of years ago. People have obviously put in good solutions around that. It's very difficult to defend against that completely, so that we're still seeing a really high number. But you can kind of see like a difference in how they're comparing for what threat actors are doing. So this is like going back to that point that you had of like, why is this something that we really need to care about?
Karla, if I could interject here, this is, and I'll probably have more opportunities to make this point, but I love to talk about how cybersecurity is a combination of three things: technology, people, and process. And, when you're talking about a phishing attack, you said you can never completely rid phishing attacks 100%, because what that type of attack is leveraging is a human error. And we will never be able to 100% eradicate human error. That's what we do. We make mistakes. And it's interesting to point that out, because it's 33% of the equation in security is what your people are going to choose to do. And no tool is going to be able to stop that completely. So, I mean, I just wanted to highlight that, because you kind of made the point a little quieter than I like to, and I wanted to throw that out there. So thank you.
I mean, there might be some phishing company vendors that will disagree on that point and, claim, I've seen some bold claims, but I believe that, right? Like, I don't know how you ever completely eradicate that risk with a technology, because if you're tired and you click on the wrong thing by accident, no matter how much training you've had, like, we can all make mistakes. So like, I agree with what you've just said.
Well, we could turn off the phone and the email and the whole internet, right?
Yes.
Well, then I would still say something that I'm not supposed to in front of people I'm not supposed to say it in front of. So don't worry, I got us covered. I'll make the mistake.
There you go. So like, yeah, if we maybe move on to the next one, like this is some of the numbers that I was talking about, like the number of vulnerabilities that are getting discovered. And this is why I think, like, to your point earlier, like, why are we talking about this so much more? Like, because we're finding so many more vulnerabilities. Now, what that 0.5% reference is we've got several thousand vulnerabilities discovered each year. Our research says 0.5% are ever actually exploited. So we have all these theoretical ways that we can breach different software and breach your systems, but actually we don't need that many. Like, we need a tiny, tiny amount. And when you see that number, and then when you break that down into like, well, if it's only 0.5%, how many do I actually need to care about? The difference is really staggering. So a lot of people, the general way of, like, the typical way you do it is, hey, if it's a CVSS score of 7+, I'm going to patch it. When you start looking at it in terms of like what's exploited or exploitable and likely to be exploited in the future, you cut your workload by about 65%. It's like a crazy, crazy amount of time you can save while not really accepting any more risk.
Give everybody the basic on vulnerability versus exploit versus threat, just in case we have anybody that doesn't know. So when you're saying exploit and you're also saying only a very, very small percentage of these massive amount of vulnerabilities that we're finding are exploited. There are going to be people that just by nature don't know what that means. And I think that it helps put it in frame for people when they do know what it means. So if you don't mind, do that for everybody.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, just to add on to what Zach said, I think most of our listeners know what those words mean,
Yep.
but there's a technical definition in cybersecurity, and that's the important bit.
Yeah, do you know what there is? Because vulnerability, like lots of things are a vulnerability. Like what I'm talking about are CVEs, like those actual software vulnerabilities. But even I do it. I use the word, people are a vulnerability, right? Like I use that word interchangeably. So like this is that CVE definition. And this may be dumbing it down a little too far. This is like how I've introduced it to interns and marketing, but I like to think of it like
well, it's like the 0.5. What is that the CISA Kev list? Like, where's that number?
That's coming from Orpheus research, but
Okay.
we do use the CISA Kev list as part of, it's not the only thing we use, but that's part of what we use as our ground truth.
Yeah, and the backstory here is like attackers only use that many vulnerabilities because that's all they need, right? Like they don't build another attack chain if they don't need another attack chain. But if you do block sort of like their normal attacks using targeted vulnerability management, right? You're just going to be the hardest nut to crack. They're not going to build a new attack chain just for you, you know?
Well, and it's hard to build a new attack chain. It's hard to create an exploit. So rather than creating another exploit, they'll just go to the guy that didn't patch the known to be exploitable vulnerability. And that's where the value is for the market, is be the person that's in the know that patches the stuff that people are taking advantage of.
Right, like the Move It vulnerability. I feel like that has been everywhere in the community for weeks. And yet I'm still hearing, oh, we just got hit by Move It. Like,
well, so I'm a member of multiple ISOs, right? And my inbox gets inundated with, okay, we think this one's really scary because, I get early notice and I pay attention to it because it's my business to pay attention to it. But if you're not in the business of vulnerability management, if it's just one of the things you need to do in your business, right?
and also,
I mean, I guess that's what the value of your product is, right?
I mean, yes, like, but those things, like, I get those updates too, and I'm like, dang, I'm overwhelmed with all these emails. And if I've then got to go check, like, do I even have this vulnerability? Like, do I care about it? Do I even have it? Like, that's a lot for a person to do. That is, do you actually?
Not to mention, do all of my clients have that vulnerability, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and in a lot of cases, we have no idea. As a service provider, it's like, I don't know. They didn't pay me to work on that thing.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. So, yeah, I mean, maybe if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to talk about why CVSS is like not a good way to do it. And this is the way a lot of people tell me they do it, if they even get that far, right? If they get to that point, like to your earlier point, oh, we scan it and then we do X, it typically looks like, well, we're looking at what the CVSS score is. So the CVSS score is a severity score. Doesn't take into account whether it's exploited or not, whether like a code exists to exploit that, or whether it has been exploited. It doesn't change. Like, it's not dynamic. It's not like, hey, you score a 6 and then the day it gets exploited, it's suddenly a 9. Like, it is what it is. It's theoretical severity. And it's actually really slow when you start looking at how long it takes from like that number being reserved to the like CVE being announced, what it is, and like that score being assigned. It could be several weeks, and not everything moves so quickly as like some of them do, like a Move It kind of speed, but it's pretty slow. So when you have got those Move It type vulnerabilities, CVSS can't really keep up. Like, doesn't take into account anything about, and they do have a way for you to go and do some manual work for like, well, it sits on this asset and I care about this asset more than I care about this one. But if this is like your baseline of prioritizing, just hugely problematic.
Well, what are the better things for us to use?
Should I hit the button?
Yeah, it's probably next slide.
Yeah. Well, I think the next slide is me talking about
Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with it, Karla?
Well, what is it? What is it? Like, it's a score. What is it? That's the question.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, like there you go. There's more things that I didn't even complain about. Like we don't know, like do any threat actors even care about that vulnerability? Are they talking about it, sharing it? Like
how do we know if they're talking about it? I have an inkling, but I think that's an interesting thing.
Well, they use X, right? Because we're not calling it Twitter anymore, right? Like they just literally talk about vulnerability. They get proud. They're like, hey, I just created a new exploit, took over 1,000 machines and emptied some bank accounts, and they post it right to Twitter.
Oh boy.
There are plenty of places they talk about it. We have various honeypots that observe, are they hitting it? Are they trying to get to it? So there's a few different ways you can see if they can. Again, like it's maybe there are very few companies that have the resources to be able to do this yourself. Like I get that this stuff is hard to do yourself.
I'm gonna move forward here. I think we.
All right.
So
I've got more examples trashing CVSS. Do we need to move past me trashing it? And
well, no, this is great because I think most of the people that are listening right now have probably seen a report before with vulnerabilities on it, and a lot of them have heard of CVSS and theoretically know that vulnerabilities are like low, medium, high, or low, medium, high critical, and there's a number. The number like it's 0 to 10, right? And this one, I can't read the specifics on that one without zooming in here, but it's a 9.8. So is that scary or not scary?
So to most people, it's scary. To us, not scary. So we've given it a really
brave. Okay.
Yeah. These are my examples. Like this is, it's a pretty old CVE. It's like 6 years old. We're saying, so we have developed a way of predicting which vulnerabilities will be exploited. So we're saying 4% chance that this will be exploited in the future. Like essentially we're saying, like our measure is if it's 25% or above, you probably need to worry about it. So at this point, we're saying this is not really something you need to worry about. But under CVSS, yes, 9.8 is crazy, and you would be very worried about it and making an effort to do something.
Right, but it's been a 9.8 for 6 years, and like no one's ever taken advantage of it, right? So how scary could it be?
Yes. Exactly that. And there are other systems like that are trying to do this. So EPSS is another way of predicting what they think will be exploited. There are it's not just us or nothing. Like there are other systems out there. I have a whole
right. So
there's problems with those, but
EPSS is what we're using. I know Coalition's got its thing. Some vulnerability management vendors have had some version of a score like this for a while, but I think like if we rewind like 5 or 10 years ago, these scores weren't these guesses weren't very good, but you guys are able to really provide a lot of insights in these scores now, right? They're getting pretty accurate.
Yeah, so as has been tested by the UK's Department of Defence, the Ministry of Defence in the UK, they said 94% accurate. So as far as I'm aware, because you have EPSS, you have Coalition, they haven't put their scores to the test by somebody independent, third party like that. So I think we're the only ones who are saying that. And they're slow. When you dig down into it, they're actually very slow in how quickly they make those predictions, which isn't that helpful. I'm a big fan of EPSS. Like I like the people that have developed it, and I think their mission is awesome, and they've made it open source. So I think it's problematic, but I also think that they have a good goal, and there's some good stuff about what they're trying to do.
So this one's only an 8, right? So I think in a CVSS 3 parlance, that would be a high, right? But not a critical. But your score here looks super scary. So
There's 100 and the bar is red. There's red all over the place. Karla, what's going on with the red?
Like, this is being actively exploited, right? Like, we know that what you can do, like, we know threat actors are using it. What you maybe can't see further down, like at least 4 different threat actors are using this actively in attacks. Like, and 8 is still pretty high. So it's not like, you know, CVSFs have scored it a 5 and no one's caring about it. They, you know, you are probably still caring about it. But if you compare it to the last one that they've scored a 9.8 that no one's using and no one's used in 6 years, this is an 8.1, and yet it's being actively used in attacks. Like,
well, and you're saying it 8.1 is pretty high, but you know, when I look at customer reports, if we're only looking at CVSS and we filter for only high and critical, it's half the vulnerabilities. We've only taken half of them off the table. So it's gone from 40,000 to 20,000, right?
Yeah.
And
so around 68% of all vulnerabilities have a CVSS score of 7 or above.
Yeah. Yeah. So
sounds like a spooky scale.
It was a great idea when they came out with it like 20 years ago. Or maybe not quite 20, right? Or maybe it is about 20 now.
It could be 20 by the time by the time some people are watching this, it's 20 years later.
All right.
Next slide.
So this is just, we can rattle through these next 3. This is how I'm showing like how we do it differently. So if you've got a scan and actually you've got 6,000 odd vulnerabilities internally, if we click through to the next one, we break it down like 400 actually being exploited. So all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about 6,000, you can worry about 400. And because we're using all that threat intel, if you click through to the next one, we're saying 14 used in ransomware attacks. So you can suddenly worry about 14 instead of 6,000 and dramatically improve how secure your business is.
And 14, that sounds like a ticket I could put in, and like a pretty average-ish engineer could probably like wipe those out in an afternoon.
Matt, I want to ask another MSP-based question. What does this do for the efficiency and the profitability of the people handling vulnerability management?
So we didn't talk about profitability earlier, but it's super important because, you know, a lot of times MSPs know that something should be done, but they can't get their customers to pay for it because they can't figure out how to do it. You know, some MSPs just mark everything up by like 100% or 200% or whatever, right? And other MSPs use other methodologies, but the point is that they have to factor the cost of their labor, right, and all their other overhead in delivering something to a customer. And sometimes when you stack up all those costs, right, and you like present it to the customer, they say, yeah, I can't afford that. And then that just nothing gets happen, even though nothing happens, even though, you know, the MSP knows it's a good idea and they recommend it and they say, you know, you should really have the thing. Right. But, you know, if cutting 6,000 down to 14, like all of a sudden, that's something you could stick a price on that the customer can actually afford. And then they say yes, right?
And you've provided service that is going to actually protect them. So everybody is able to win in the situation. You're not taking advantage of the end client. You've provided a necessary value, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can get lost too in the technical geeky. Let's quantitatively analyze our risk, and then, you know, put together a 400-point plan to mitigate it over 14 years. But and I you know, I could have fun doing that, believe it or not. But yeah, we got to make money doing this stuff, right? And the customers have to say, yes, I'll pay for it. So this sounds like a pretty critical part of a vulnerability management strategy to really, you know, cut that down to the actual risks that are going to impact the customer rather than sticking in the theoretical.
The true risky business.
You want to pop to the last one here?
So the last one is just an example for us on like our prediction. So I mentioned already, like, you know, we can predict which ones will be exploited in the future, you know, with 94% of accuracy. So I think the thing that I get excited about is exactly what you just said, right? Like, we can actually make businesses more secure by doing less work, and it takes a couple of minutes.
Whew.
So which window arrangement do we want here? put Karla on the big screen. So Karla, you're in this MSP submarket with us. I know you're working with us with CompTIA members. We're together in this essentially a submarket. Talk to me about how MSPs that you're working with, and I guess other types of service providers, right? Because not everyone's an MSP. Um, are responding to your concepts. Are they are they finding success with these concepts where they didn't before?
We just onboarded someone new that we were replacing a solution kind of similar to this. And like the feedback kind of blew us away a little bit. They were like, this is much better, much more stable, much more like easy for us to understand than what we were using before. So yeah, we are seeing a lot of success. Like our product's been in the enterprise market for a little while. So like I'm excited to be in the MSP space as well. I feel like it's a nice group of people to work with.
It's a totally different business, right? You go into the enterprise market and you say, "Hey, I've got a solution," right? And they buy it or they don't buy it on the basis of whether they think it's going to minimize risk, right? Because this is a cyber product. With the MSP market, there's like that added, how am I going to sell this thing? How am I going to make money doing this thing? Is my engineer skilled enough for this? Those are all considerations. I'm glad that you've had some feedback from MSPs that are saying that this is easier and better because a lot that's not true of a lot of tools. It's just like you swap out a tool and it's just like the same as the other tools. And so when you're able to cut time and make things simpler, I mean, what that actually translates to is like, instead of 3 people on my team knowing how to do this, maybe it's 7, or instead of 1 person on my team knowing how to do this thing, maybe it's 3, right? And that means you can touch that many more customers.
Yeah. And maybe save money too, right? Like to that point of, well, we're charging this for a service. If I can suddenly use this and save money on what I'm doing, then that's a win too.
So we're seeing this in 2 different ways in our partner base, the vulnerability management using targeting. We're seeing MSPs that are putting SLAs in place, and they're either selling this as a service per month. Sometimes they sell it for the year, but they bake in the human cost, right? Other times they're doing assessments. I'm curious, where are you seeing the largest success? And we could just talk about not specific to the pricing specifically for the vulnerability management software, but in terms of the market opportunity for the MSPs. I know that we're seeing people bake vulnerability management in, and they're adding $10-$20 per endpoint value into their bundles, or sometimes they're selling it on its own, right? It's part of a bundle sale, or it's a vulnerability management thing. Is that in line with what you're seeing, that MSPs are able to pull down, basically double-digit revenue on this stuff?
Yeah, that is in line with what I'm saying. And we've got to come to Brad's question. I really want to answer that question.
Oh, is this Brad? Should we pull Brad up on screen here?
But yes, what we're seeing is that this is becoming like it's your basic level package, right? So however you are deciding to pull your charging together, like we priced it really, really low, like for the MSP space, so that it can be part of that basic package that you offer to your customers. And it needs to sit with a scanning tool, whichever one you want to use. So like we've taken that into account too. But yeah, like early feedback is yes, exactly all the things you just said.
So Brad's asking about outside in. You want to tackle that one?
I really want to tackle that one. So we apply this to, we do attack surface management risk ratings for third-party risk. So we work with a lot of insurers. I've already said we do an enterprise solution as well. And so this scoring that we use for vulnerabilities is part of that overall scoring. And we've had a couple of POCs around this with the insurers. We're showing a correlation between our scores being like the worst performing companies and an increased risk of ransomware claims. So for one of them, 70% more likely to make a ransomware claim if you have a bad Orpheus score. So yes, this absolutely makes a difference. And it makes a difference like for the people that are using our reports before they go to insurers, like being able to reduce that risk, get more offers from the insurance companies, better
So
price.
you went really quickly and with like a percentage, but just to back up a little bit, what you just said, knowing what I know about the insurance industry, that information is not enough to make the full risk decision on a customer.
No.
But it's enough to divide the applications that come into a carrier in half and say this half I should deny because they're riskier, and this half I should accept because they're less risky. And as the insurer, you're just going to take the less risky half, and then maybe you're going to go further into that because maybe you want to subdivide that again. But this,
Or
with
then
that
maybe
type of
you just sell the risk as an insurer and don't worry about it at all, which is
well,
what
yeah, they just
the
price it.
majority of them
Sometimes
do.
it depends on the size of the policy, right? Like they're happy to just eat it sometimes on that basis of you're in the better half of companies.
Mhm.
But if you're asking for a $5 million policy, they're going to look a little deeper than that. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you're a small business, that means a lot to an insurer, right?
Yeah.
That you're less likely to have a ransomware claim because they don't actually want to like give you the long form, right? They just want to know really briefly like which pile
Well,
are you in?
well, and they definitely don't want to pay out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if you're likely to not have that type of situation happen, which you want to be likely to not have that type of situation happen.
Now, I think Karla, in one of our discussions, we discussed third-party attack surface. You want to tackle that one because we didn't really cover it so far, but like we're talking about outside in. This is not just like your business, right, or your MSP's end customer, right? There's some you guys can support that third-party risk angle too.
Yeah, we did. And I did kind of ramble and really quickly on that last bit. Yeah. So we can do outside in scans, risk rating scores. The insurance companies use them, but the main application is third party risk. So if you're an MSP, either looking at those scores and monitoring your clients or their third parties. Now, when I haven't been in the MSP world that long. And when I started, I felt like third party risk was just way in the future, that, it's too advanced almost like for where most companies were. But I think that's changed really quick. And I'm having a lot more conversations about MSPs that want to offer third party risk services. And like these outside in scans, risk ratings, they're a pretty cost effective way for you to sell a third party risk solution. It's not questionnaires and audits and all of the things that you can do that are really difficult. Like this is actually a pretty easy way to do it. And back to the insurance point, insurers are looking now at your third parties as well as your risk. So if it's not there yet, this is the next year or two you've got to worry about this.
It's not just MSPs that like want to do this thing, right? They have to do this thing because I've got this theory called trickle down cyber.
Oh, okay.
Okay, George.
So really big companies are evaluating their risk, right? Or they're being stabbed by the government when they're not evaluating their risk, right? And they came up with this solution of checking their supply chain. And so they've been pushing on to medium-sized businesses, right? Hey, what's your risk like? You're in our network, literally, right? But then it does trickle down into the medium-sized companies realize that they need to comply with a standard. They pull up that standard. The standard has this entry that says third party risk, and they're like, oh, we have to do the thing too that we were asked to do. And it really is pushing across the whole economy right now. And as an MSP, even if you're only working with 20-person companies, right, your customer's customer is asking about their security, and their customers are asking about security, right? And so it's not like this is a sexy thing that MSP suddenly thought would be like fun to do, right? They just like literally have to do it to survive.
They have to
And
do it to survive. And if they could find a way to profit on the thing that they have to do to survive, that would be a pretty cool way to eat the medicine, or
Yeah.
however you want to phrase that.
Yeah.
And third-party risk programs are expensive. So if you think about what people normally do, they normally get maybe a software to manage questionnaires, and they send questionnaires to all their suppliers, and then they chase their suppliers multiple times to fill them in, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Then they've got to review them. Then they've got to decide if they like it or not. If they're really critical, maybe they're going to go audit them on site. Like, that is a lot. Like, if you can cut out that workload, then I think that's a win.
Yeah, and the small businesses, realistically, they can get away with like the easy mode, right? As long as they're doing something, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like I've just had my brain massaged here. We went into a
Adding more wrinkles.
do you guys want to like? Have we learned anything today? What are our takeaways?
Well, I mean, you should be doing vulnerability management, and you can do it a lot more simply than what it might seem initially.
Yeah, and we can make money doing it.
And we can make money doing it.
Yeah.
I was going to leave that on the table for another eager panelist.
Karla, what do you think? Like, what do MSPs need to know? Like, just like what do they need to know that you need them to know right now that we haven't covered yet?
Do you know, I liked what you said about transferring the risk. Like, I think that's a good way to think about it. So, like, who is holding that risk? And then if it's not a risk you want to take, what can you actually do about it? I think that's maybe my takeaway.
Yeah, and there's we could do a whole podcast on risk chains, but you have to have the conversation as the first thing, and then you have to document it in some way, what the decision was and who made it, and you should enforce it in contracts, right? And you can do risk waivers, you can do risk acceptance. I mean, all these things, they should be core to an MSP's business, because really, like, we had that conversation about business owners do care about risk, right? So if you have the risk conversation instead of the technology conversation, all of a sudden that customer actually wants to talk about security.
Well, if you talk about security in terms of what the end client understands, and I used to be one of those end clients, so I'll tell you what we understand. We understand people and processes. If you lead with the tech, it's not going to digest. You have to lead with the thing your end client knows already, speak their language, and then once you've done that, then you can educate them. But you've got to start in the space that they know, and if they're running a business that isn't technical, it's because they know how to take care of people, and they know how to manage people, and they know how to run a process.
And Brad's leaving us with his takeaway here.
I like Brad.
I like Brad too. I'm glad you said that. Matt, what about you, man? You're the security guru.
Well, for me, most of people. So look, I ran an MSP, and I work with other MSPs, and I'm a technologist. I'm a geek, right? And like the sales process and the marketing process isn't the fun part for me. But like it's I don't think of it as like drinking medicine. I think of it as eating vegetables, right? Like you have to think of that about the reality of the sale with your customer, and the economics of the sale, and the economics of the service, and the unit cost. And I think if you've been responding to vulnerability management because your customer says, I need this thing, can you make a report? You're doing it wrong, right? This should be a thing your customer wants to pay you every month to do. And they won't stop paying you because they don't want you to stop looking for risk, right? And it's something you should enjoy doing because it fits within your skill sets or your team's skill sets, and it fits within your workflows. And so put the risk rating systems in place, put the process flows in place, put the SLAs in place with your customer. They will buy them either alone or as part of a bundle. And make that extra $10, $20 per device with your customer.
Awesome.
I think that's it for me. Should we call it here?
Let's do it. I'm grateful for Karla coming on, and thank you for everybody coming and watching. If you want more educational content, we have a YouTube channel where you can continue your learning, or join us next week for another Fort Mesa Roundtable. Thanks, everybody.